My boss laughed so hard he had to lean back in his chair. The folder was open in front of him, his signature still wet on the back page. He was looking at me like I was the punchline to a joke only he understood. "You're so stupid," he said. "You didn't even read what was in there." I didn't react. I just picked up the folder, tucked it under my arm, and said, "Thanks for your company, sir." But that moment, that perfect crystalline moment of him not understanding what had actually just happened, that's the end of the story. So let me back up and tell you how I got here. My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 38 years old, and 9 years ago, I walked into a job interview at Carver & Associates in Atlanta, Georgia, and decided to spend nearly a decade building something that someone else was going to try to take away from me. Carver & Associates is a mid-sized marketing consultancy. Not flashy, not the kind of place that makes headlines, but it's solid. Or at least, it was supposed to be. When I joined in 2015, we were the kind of firm that showed up, did good work, and kept our clients happy. I was a junior account director then. I was hungry, I was sharp, and I understood something that a lot of people in that industry don't. Client relationships are currency. For the first 5 years, I built. I studied client contracts until I could recite them. I learned the margins. I learned who their competitors were. I learned what kept them awake at night. I went to meetings early and stayed late. I closed deals that seemed impossible. When people left the company, I picked up their accounts and made them stronger. By my 6th year, I wasn't just managing accounts. I was the person clients asked for by name. Then, about 4 years ago, something almost broke us. We lost 3 major clients in 6 months. The kind of losses that don't just hurt the bottom line. They put a spotlight on every weakness in the operation. Suddenly, everybody was nervous. The owners were nervous. The CFO was nervous. I was nervous. And I did what I'd always done. I worked. I didn't complain about the situation. I didn't wait for management to fix it. I dove into our remaining relationships, and I made sure every single one of them felt like they were the most important thing we had, because they were. I brought 2 of the lost clients back. I grew the revenue on the accounts I managed by nearly 30% over 18 months. I didn't take credit at meetings. I didn't lobby for recognition. I just made sure the firm stayed standing. By the time we'd stabilized, I'd built something real. Not just a book of business. Trust. Institutional knowledge. The kind of thing that's impossible to replace quickly. So when Doug Heller arrived 3 years ago, I thought maybe things were going to change for me. The firm brought him in as regional vice president. That's the kind of position that usually leads somewhere, upward. He was charming. He had a consulting background that looked good on paper. He knew how to talk in a room full of people. I thought maybe he'd be the kind of leader who could see what I'd done and let it open doors. That was naive. Within 3 months, Doug started showing up on my client calls, not to observe, to participate, to lead. I'd spend weeks nurturing a relationship, developing a strategy, preparing a presentation, and Doug would sit in the meeting and present the idea as if it had originated in his head. Not maliciously, in a way that seemed intentional, in a way that felt like he just naturally took up space. And clients, especially clients I'd already built trust with, would look confused for a moment, and then they'd give him credit anyway, because he was the VP, and that's what happened. Then came the promotions. 2 years ago, there was an opening for senior director. Everyone knew I was the obvious choice. I had the relationships. I had the track record. I knew the business inside and out. The interview process was formality, except Doug recommended someone else. A guy named Marcus, who'd been at the firm for 2 years and had a charming personality and a talent for telling people what they wanted to hear. I didn't fight it. I just kept doing my job. A year later, the same position opened up again. This time, I applied formally. I prepared for the interview. I brought examples of what I'd built. And this time, Doug gave that job to his friend from his previous company, someone with no history at Carver, someone who'd never managed a major account. After that interview, Tom Garrison, our CFO, pulled me aside. Tom's the kind of person who doesn't waste words. He said, "That should have been you." I appreciated it, but appreciation doesn't pay rent, and neither does loyalty. I kept doing what I'd always done. I kept building. I kept managing. I kept making the firm money. And then, in January of this year, something shifted. Hartwell Group came onto our radar. They're a major retail logistics company, the kind of client that changes a year, the kind of account that turns you into an equity partner on the trajectory, a $4.2 million annual retainer, 7 figures in the first year alone. Hartwell Group had been shopping around. 3 other firms had pitched. I knew the decision maker at Hartwell. Not well, but well enough. I'd met him at an industry event years before. We'd had one real conversation, nothing transactional, just genuine. So I called him. Not cold, not formal, just genuine. I said, "I know you're looking at other firms. They're probably going to tell you they'll grow your logistics footprint. I'm going to tell you that what you actually need is to understand your footprint, and then we'll grow it together. If that's interesting, let's get coffee." He said yes. Over the next 8 weeks, I didn't give him a slick presentation. I asked questions, real ones, about his operations, about where he was losing money that he didn't realize he was losing, about what his competitors were doing that he wasn't tracking. I spent 40 hours in meetings and another 40 hours analyzing his data before I ever put a proposal in front of him. When the proposal came, it wasn't flashy, it was thorough. It was built on facts. It was built on understanding. Hartwell signed. On January 22nd, the ink went down, and we had a $4.2 million annual retainer. My contract with Carver specified a 1.6% origination commission on new business I brought in. I'd never brought in new business like this before. 1.6% of $4.2 million is $67,200. The biggest single commission in the firm's history. I didn't tell people. I didn't celebrate. I just kept working. I started the transition plan with Hartwell. I scheduled the first delivery meeting. I made sure everything was organized and ready and on track. 3 days after signing, Doug called me into his office. That's when things became very clear. He was sitting behind his desk when I walked in. He gestured to the chair across from him. He had a folder sitting on the edge of his desk, positioned like a chess piece. He was calm, almost relaxed. He said, "So, I've been thinking, Mara. Your role here has become a bit redundant. We need to streamline. I'd like to discuss a separation arrangement." I didn't say anything. I just waited. He slid the folder across the desk, 14 pages. Separated from the firm, with severance calculated at 6 weeks' salary and a standard non-compete and confidentiality clause. He said, "I'd like you to review that and return it signed by Friday. We're going to make this as smooth as possible." I picked up the folder. I looked at him. I said, "Okay." He was already looking at his computer. He waved his hand like I'd been dismissed. "Great, Friday. And hey, don't worry, we'll help you figure out your next thing." I walked out of his office and sat at my desk for a long moment, just holding the folder. No anger, no panic, just focus. Because I understood exactly what had happened. He'd brought me in here to separate me from the firm within 90 days of the biggest commission I'd ever earned. He thought he had a mechanism to void it. He thought he was going to get away with it. That night, I read every single word of that 14-page agreement. I made coffee. I printed a copy. I sat on my couch and I went line by line because I'd learned 9 years ago that documents are everything. Language is everything. One word in the wrong place can mean the difference between keeping something you've earned and losing everything. Page 1. Standard definitions. Page 2. Severance terms. Pages 3 through 8, non-compete, confidentiality, insurance provisions. Page 9, mutual waiver of claims. And right there on page 9, clause 11B buried in the middle of a paragraph full of legal framework and standard release language, was one sentence. The company and employee mutually waive all claims related to compensation, including but not limited to commissions, bonuses, and incentives on business originated within 90 days prior to the separation date. The Hartwell contract had been signed 6 weeks ago. That clause would void every dollar of my commission, every single dollar. I sat back. I read it again, once more. Then I went to my laptop and I opened a document, a blank page. I opened the original agreement as a PDF and I looked at the formatting, the font, the margins, the line spacing, the exact structure of the legal language. Then I drafted a replacement for Clause 11B. All commissions earned by employee on business originated and contracted prior to the separation date shall be payable in full within 30 days of contract execution, regardless of employee's employment status at the time of payment. Such commissions shall not be subject to waiver, forfeiture, or reduction. I read it 3 times. Then I printed it out on the firm's standard letterhead. Letterhead I still had access to as a senior director. I formatted it identically to the original. Same font, same margins, same legal precision. Then I took the original page 9 out of the folder and I replaced it with my version. I photographed the original and saved it to an encrypted cloud folder on my personal account. Then I put the replacement page back in the folder in the exact position the original had occupied. For 2 days, I went to work like nothing had changed. I sent a few final emails to clients. I archived my files. I said quiet goodbyes. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. I didn't confide in anyone. I didn't hint at anything. I was exactly as professional and unremarkable as I'd always been. Thursday morning, I printed out the clients list and made my personal notes. Thursday afternoon, I organized my desk. Thursday night, I reviewed the folder one more time. The replacement page was perfect. Formatted correctly, positioned correctly. There was nothing that would catch the eye if someone was simply flipping through to find a signature line. Friday morning, I walked into Doug's office and I placed the folder on his desk. He barely looked at it. He just opened to the signature page. He read my name. He countersigned with a pen that looked expensive. Then he leaned back in his chair and smiled. And that's when he said it. You know, Mara, you've always been competent in a technical sense, but I have to say, you're so stupid. You didn't even read what was in there. There's a clause that voids your Hartwell commission, every single dollar. You just signed it away. You had the whole week to read through 14 pages, and you walked in here without even bothering. He tapped the folder. He was laughing, actually laughing. I looked at him for a long moment. I smiled. Not a forced smile, a real one, the kind that comes when something aligns perfectly, when you see clearly, when you know something that someone else doesn't. I picked up the folder. I tucked it under my arm. Thanks for your company, sir, I said, and I walked out. I walked out of Doug's office that Friday morning and I didn't look back, not at my desk, not at the common areas, not at the Atlanta skyline through the office windows. I just walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and left. The folder was under my arm. My signature was on page 14. His signature was right next to mine. It took him 10 days to figure it out. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at home in my apartment, the one I'd rented before I was promoted the first time, the one I'd never bothered to upgrade because I was waiting for something at the firm that was never going to come. My phone rang. It was Doug's number. Mara. His voice was different. Tight, something underneath it that wasn't charming anymore. There's an issue with one of the clauses in the separation agreement. We need you to come back in and re-sign. I didn't panic. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, I'm no longer an employee of Carver & Associates. The agreement is signed by both parties. I'm not available to re-sign. There was a pause, a long one. Then, you switched the papers. I didn't confirm and I didn't deny. I just said, as a senior director, I had legitimate access to company letterhead. The document you signed is legally binding. If there's a dispute about the terms, I'd recommend you consult with legal counsel. He said something that I didn't quite catch, something angry, then he hung up. I sat with my phone in my lap for a while after that, not nervous, not worried, just calm. Because I'd already thought through this part. I'd already considered what he would do, how he would react, what his options actually were. The original clause would have held up in court if challenged. It was legally sound, however unethical. It would have taken money from my account and put it in his. What I'd done was create a replacement that was also legally sound. Maybe more sound, actually, because it was transparent and clear about what it was protecting. And I had proof of the original. A week went by. No word from Doug. No contact from HR. No legal letter. Just silence. Then, on a Friday morning, my bank account received a deposit, $67,200. Tom Garrison had processed it per the signed agreement. The commission was paid in full. I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee, and I looked at my banking app. The number was real. The transfer was real. It was over. The next week, Priya texted me. Priya was my junior colleague, the one person in that office who'd quietly watched me work for 9 years without ever treating me like I was supposed to fail. She said she was getting lunch and asked if I wanted to meet. We went to a place near the office that none of the senior people went to. Priya ordered a salad. I ordered soup. And she looked at me across the table and she said, "You switched the papers, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. I raised my coffee cup and I looked at her over the rim. "I read every word," I said. "That's all." She smiled. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. She'd seen what I'd done, not because I'd told her, but because she understood how I thought. She understood that I wouldn't have walked out of that office without knowing exactly what I was doing. She said, "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know yet," I told her. "Something different." The truth is, I did know. I'd started making phone calls 3 days after I left, not to look for another job, to look for something else entirely. I had clients calling me already. People who'd worked with me at Carver and who wanted to continue working with me outside of it. The kind of relationship that transcends the company letterhead. Within 2 weeks, I'd set up a consulting practice operating out of my dining room. Just me, a laptop, a phone, and a client list that I'd earned over 9 years of actually showing up. But let me tell you what happened at Carver & Associates after I left, because it matters. Doug told people I'd left voluntarily, that I'd decided to pursue other opportunities, that it was all very amicable and mutual. No one corrected him on it. Not Tom, not the other partners. Reputation protection is easier than the truth. The Hartwell account was handed to 2 junior staffers, good people, but young. They didn't know Hartwell's operation. They hadn't spent 40 hours analyzing their margins. They hadn't built a relationship with the decision maker based on genuine understanding rather than sales presentation. They just inherited an account and tried to manage it. 3 weeks after I left, Hartwell called for a check-in meeting, the kind of meeting that usually happens every quarter to make sure everything's running smoothly. The 2 junior staffers went in prepared. They had talking points. They had new ideas. Hartwell's decision maker sat across from them, and he said, in very polite language, that he wasn't seeing the same level of strategic thinking he'd seen before. He wasn't seeing the kind of granular understanding of his operation that had been there when he signed the contract. He felt like they were treating it like a standard account, not like the partnership they'd discussed. 2 weeks after that meeting, Hartwell requested a reduction in their contract. They downgraded their annual retainer by 40%. $1.68 million in annual revenue, gone. Not because the work was bad, not because Carver couldn't deliver, because the relationship had been built on one person's understanding, and that person was no longer there. When Priya told me this, she was careful about it. She didn't gloat. She knew what it meant. The Hartwell account was the biggest thing the firm had, and I'd built it. And Doug had thought that he could take it, along with my commission, and everything would just continue as if nothing had changed. What he didn't understand was that Hartwell wasn't money on a contract. It was a relationship, and relationships are portable. I wasn't surprised when the account downgraded. I was already 3 months into my consulting practice. I had 4 clients at that point. All of them were people I'd worked with before. All of them paid me better than Carver had. All of them called me by my first name and asked for my opinion, not my boss's name and presentation skills. I was working from my dining room table, choosing my clients, setting my own hours, answering to exactly no one, and making more money than I'd made my last year at the firm. But here's the thing that matters more than the money, and it's the thing I think about now when I look back at that whole situation. It was never really about the commission. The commission was the manifestation of something bigger. It was the proof that my work had value. It was the thing that Doug thought he could strip away to make himself feel powerful. When he laughed at me in his office that Friday morning, when he told me I was stupid for not reading the agreement, when he thought he had voided my commission and cut me off at my knees, he thought he was winning. What he actually did was set in motion the exact sequence of events that would lead me out of that office and into something he could never touch or take from me. I didn't go to him with accusations after I cashed the commission. I didn't gloat. I didn't tell anyone exactly what I'd done except Priya, and that was 6 months later at someone else's leaving lunch. I just took the win quietly, set it down, and moved forward. That's the thing people get wrong about workplace revenge or workplace justice or whatever you want to call it. Everyone expects it to be loud. They expect confrontation and drama and someone finally snapping and telling the boss off in front of everyone. They expect fireworks. The quietest moves are the most effective ones. Doug never recovered from the Hartwell downgrade. Within 6 months, the board brought in a new managing partner, not Doug. Within a year, he'd left the firm entirely. I heard through Priya that he'd landed at another consultancy across town. I don't think about him much anymore, but I remember that moment in his office with complete clarity. The way he leaned back in his chair, the way he smiled, the way he said I was stupid, the way he thought he'd won. What I didn't expect was how the story would follow me, even after everything was resolved. Not the Hartwell account, not the commission, not even the consulting practice. The story itself, what I'd done, how I'd done it, became the thing people wanted to talk about. 6 months after I left Carver, I was at a leaving lunch for someone at a different firm. There were maybe 15 of us in a private room at a restaurant downtown, people I'd worked with over the years, people I'd maintained relationships with because I actually liked them, not because I was networking. We were about an hour into lunch, and Priya, who'd stayed at Carver because that was her choice and I respected it, pulled me aside. We were standing by the window overlooking Peachtree Street, and she leaned in and asked me directly, "You switched the papers, didn't you?" This time it wasn't a question with a question mark. It was a statement. She'd been sitting with the knowledge for 6 months, watching Doug's downfall, seeing the Hartwell account fall apart, understanding the full picture of what I'd done and why I'd done it. I smiled. Not because I was proud of outsmarting someone, but because I was grateful to her for understanding the choice I'd made. I raised my glass and I said, "I read every word, that's all." She clinked her glass against mine, and we didn't talk about it again. We didn't need to. But that moment lodged in my head, the simplicity of it, the completeness of it, the fact that 9 years of building something, months of careful planning, and a 15-minute conversation in an office was now just over. And the only thing that mattered, the only thing anyone remembered, was that I'd outsmarted someone who tried to take something that was mine. What's strange is what happened after that. I got messages. Priya would text me and say, "Someone at the office is asking me if you really switched the papers." I'd get calls from people in the consulting space in Atlanta asking questions about the situation. The story had this inexplicable gravity to it. It moved through the professional community in this quiet, almost mythological way. Not gossip, not malicious, just information that people felt like they needed to understand and repeat. People would ask me about the specifics. How did I print it so it looked the same? How did I know it would work? Weren't you afraid he'd notice? Weren't you afraid of legal consequences? Weren't you worried about references for future jobs? And the honest answer to all of it was, I wasn't afraid because I'd done my homework. I knew the contract law. I knew what I could prove. I knew what the company's letterhead looked like because I'd used it 1,000 times. I knew what Doug would and wouldn't check because I'd watched him work for 3 years. I knew that he'd never read past the signature page because that wasn't how he operated. I wasn't brave, I was careful. And careful is better than brave in situations like this, because careful doesn't leave room for mistakes. But the reason people kept asking isn't really about the mechanics of what I did. It's about what it represented. It represented someone taking back something that was being stolen from them. It represented understanding the system well enough to use it against someone who was using it against you. It represented a level of clarity about your own value that most people never achieve. I spent 9 years at Carver & Associates building something, not just a client list, understanding, strategy, the kind of nuanced knowledge about business that takes time and attention to develop. And when the moment came where someone tried to take that value away from me, the choice wasn't complicated. I wasn't going to let him do it. Not because I was angry, because I understood that my work had value, and I was going to protect it. The consulting practice grew. I'm now 2 years into it, and I have 12 regular clients. Some of them moved from Carver to work with me. Some of them I found in the market. Some of them came through referrals from people who'd worked with me before. I work about 30 hours a week now. I make more money than I made in my last 3 years at Carver combined. I don't have a boss. I don't have politics to navigate. I don't have to watch other people take credit for my work. And the best part is, I'm happier. Not because of the money, not because of the victory, because I made a choice based on what I knew, and that choice led me to something real. What happened with Doug was the catalyst, not the point. The point was that I valued myself enough to protect my own work. I trusted myself enough to take a risk. I understood the system well enough to move through it without making mistakes. That's what sticks with me now. Not the triumph, not the moment in his office when he realized what had happened. The real thing that changed is that I proved to myself that I could take control of my own future in a way that was calculated and clean and completely effective. Here's what I want you to understand about this. I'm not telling you this story because I think revenge is the answer to everything. I'm not saying that if someone wrongs you, the solution is to be clever and outsmart them. What I'm saying is that knowing your worth is the first step in every single thing that matters. When Doug was undermining me and taking credit for my work and blocking my promotions, the problem wasn't just Doug. The problem was that I let it continue for too long. I was waiting for the system to reward me. I was hoping that my work would speak for itself. I was trying to be the kind of person who rises above office politics and just does excellent work and assumes that will be enough. It's not enough. Not in most places. Not when someone like Doug is in the room and willing to take what's yours. But when I understood that my value wasn't dependent on his recognition, when I moved from working within Carver's system to working outside of it, everything changed. I didn't need him to approve of my worth. I didn't need the firm's letterhead to prove I was competent. I didn't need a promotion or a title to know what I was capable of. And once I knew that, the separation agreement wasn't a threat anymore. It was an opportunity. Not because I was going to cleverly outmaneuver him, though I did, but because it forced me to stop waiting and start acting. The Clause 11B thing, the switched papers, that's the story everyone wants to hear. And it is a good story. It's clean. It's satisfying. It has a moment of triumph and a moment of comeuppance. But the real story isn't about the papers or the legal language or the commission. The real story is about the 9 years before that, when I was building something and proving something and learning something. The real story is about the moment I decided that I wasn't going to let someone else's incompetence determine my future. The real story is about understanding that you don't need permission to be valuable. 2 years later, I still work from my dining room. I've upgraded the furniture and I installed a better desk lamp, but the core is the same. I'm working for myself, and I'm working with people who actually want to work with me. Not because I'm the only option, because I'm good at what I do, and they know it, and they respect it. Hartwell Group still exists. They downgraded from the $4.2 million contract, but they're still working with Carver at a lower level, and they're working with me as an independent consultant at a more significant level. I know their operation now even better than I did when I first signed them. We've worked together long enough that I can see where they're going to have problems before they have them. That's the kind of relationship you can't fake, and you can't steal, and you can't buy. Doug eventually left Atlanta entirely. Last I heard, he was at a firm in Charlotte. I don't think about him much anymore, which is probably the greatest victory of all. He's not part of my story anymore. He's just a chapter that taught me something important about what I won't tolerate and what I'm willing to do to protect myself. What I do think about is the feeling I had in his office that Friday morning. The moment when he laughed and told me I was stupid and thought he'd won. That clarity I felt wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was the crystalline understanding that I had done something very difficult, and I had done it very well, and no one was going to take that from me. That's the thing about reading every word. That's the thing about knowing the system. That's the thing about protecting your own work. Once you understand how powerful those things are, you can't un-understand it. You can't go back to waiting for other people to recognize your value. You can't unsee the small print that everyone else ignores. And when you can't unsee it, when you understand it completely, when you move through the world with that knowledge, doors open that you didn't even know existed. The fine print matters. The small moves matter. The quiet choices matter more than the loud ones. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't telling someone off. It's just walking out the door knowing that you won and letting them figure it out on their own.